The chime of the grandfather clock in the hall struck 7, each resonant bong a nail in the coffin of my first life. It was my 18th birthday, and the air in our home was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the simmering excitement of a celebration that had nothing to do with me. I stood in the doorway of the grand living room, a ghost in my own house, watching my sister, Lila, become the sun around which my parents orbited. She was 17 and a half, and that, apparently, was cause for a black tie optional gala. My mother, Eleanor, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me, was adjusting the strap of Lila's new couture dress. "Perfect, my darling. You look like a star." "I feel like one," Lila chirped, turning to admire herself in the massive gilt-edged mirror that hung over the fireplace. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny it. She had our mother's sharp, photogenic features and our father's easy charm, a combination that had rendered me, with my quiet demeanor and thoughtful face, practically invisible beside her. My father, Richard, came in then, holding a flat velvet box. His chest was puffed out with a pride so potent it was almost comical. "Not quite yet, my dear," he announced, his voice booming through the room. "A star needs her sky. A queen needs her crown jewels." He presented the box to Lila with the reverence of a knight offering his sword to his queen. My heart, a foolish, hopeful thing, gave a painful lurch. It was the box. The one my grandmother had shown me years ago, the one she'd promised would be mine on my 18th birthday. "To celebrate your acceptance into the prestigious National Design Academy," he declared, conveniently omitting that it was a summer program with a notoriously high acceptance rate and an even higher tuition fee, which he was happily funding. Lila's gasp was perfectly theatrical. She opened the box, and there it lay, nestled on a bed of worn satin. My grandmother's sapphire necklace. A cascade of silver links culminating in a single deep blue stone that was said to mirror the color of my grandmother's eyes. My eyes. "Oh, Daddy, it's the family heirloom," Lila breathed, her fingers tracing its delicate form. "It was always meant for the true jewel of this family," Eleanor cooed, her gaze flicking to me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something cold and triumphant in her eyes, before she turned back to her favored child. "It just looks so much better on you, sweetie. Your skin tone brings out the blue." The words struck me with physical force. Lila lifted the necklace and Richard helped her clasp it around her neck. It settled against her clavicle, a brilliant splash of blue against her pale skin. She preened, turning this way and that, the sapphire winking in the light of the chandelier. "It does, doesn't it?" she said, her voice dripping with false modesty. She caught my eye in the mirror. "Oh, Anna, don't look so glum. It's just a necklace." But it wasn't. It was a promise. It was the last tangible piece of the one person in this family who had ever truly seen me, who had ever loved me without condition. It was the symbol of a future, a legacy, that they had just stolen from me and handed to my sister as a bauble for a minor achievement. The room began to feel small, the air thin. The polite chatter of the arriving guests, the clinking of glasses, the soft music from the speakers, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. The pain in my chest was a living thing, a sharp, suffocating pressure that made it impossible to breathe. I had endured so much for so long. The forgotten birthdays that came before this one, the missed parent-teacher nights for my honor roll certificates because Lila had a sniffle, the way my dreams of being a writer were dismissed as a cute hobby, while Lila's finger paintings were framed as works of genius. I had swallowed it all, believing that one day, on my 18th birthday, I would be seen. I would be acknowledged. I would be handed the key to my future, both literally and figuratively. That hope died right there, under the light of the crystal chandelier, strangled by a silver chain on my sister's neck. I need some air," I managed to choke out, my voice a strangled whisper that no one heard. Or perhaps they heard and simply didn't care. I turned and fled, stumbling out the back door into the night. A storm had been brewing all evening, and now it broke, the heavens opening up with a fury that matched the tempest in my soul. Rain, cold and relentless, soaked through my simple dress in seconds, plastering it to my skin. I didn't care. I ran, blindly, across the manicured lawn, the carefully tended flower beds, my mind a vortex of pain and betrayal. I just had to get away, away from the light and the laughter and the suffocating weight of being nothing to them. My father had been having some work done on the property, a new, state-of-the-art septic system to replace the old one. The project, like many of his projects, had been started with great enthusiasm and then abandoned midway when something more interesting, Lila's upcoming equestrian lessons, had caught his attention. A large, deep pit had been excavated weeks ago, covered now only by a flimsy, rain-soaked tarp. I didn't see it. Blinded by tears and the torrential downpour, my foot caught on a loose edge of the plastic. My ankle twisted, and the world tilted violently. There was a moment of weightlessness, a heart-stopping plunge, and then a brutal, jarring impact as my head struck a piece of exposed rebar at the edge of the pit. I tumbled the rest of the way down, landing in a slurry of cold mud and rainwater at the bottom. The pain was a white-hot nova behind my eyes, followed by a spreading, unnerving numbness. The rain continued to fall, filling the pit, the muddy water rising around me. From the house, impossibly far away, I could hear a muffled burst of laughter and applause. They were probably toasting Lila. My vision tunneled, the edges darkening. My last conscious thought was not one of love or fond memories, but a single desperate silent scream that echoed in the abyss of my mind. I wish I had one more chance. Then only darkness. A gasp, ragged and violent, tore through my chest and I shot upright, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The phantom sensation of cold mud and the sharp agony in my head were so real that I instinctively reached up to touch my temple, expecting to feel blood and mangled flesh. My fingers met only smooth skin. I wasn't in a dark, muddy pit. I was in my bed. My own bed, with its soft floral duvet and the familiar lumpy pillow I'd had since I was 10. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through my window, illuminating the dancing dust motes in the air. The room smelled of lavender sachet and old books, not of rain and wet earth. Disorientation, thick and syrupy, clouded my mind. Was it a dream? A nightmare so vivid it had felt like dying? I pushed back the covers, my limbs feeling heavy and strange. My eyes scanned the room, searching for an anchor, anything to make sense of the jarring disconnect between memory and reality. They landed on the digital clock on my nightstand, its red numbers glowing innocently. The date was a year ago, to the day. It was the morning of my 17th birthday. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the confusion. I scrambled out of bed and fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The date on the screen confirmed the clock's impossible claim. I had gone back in time, exactly 1 year. The memories, the party, the necklace, the fall, the cold, lonely death were not a dream. They were a prophecy, a horrifying preview of a future that was barreling toward me. I sank to the floor, my back against the bed, pulling my knees to my chest. I had died. My own family, through their callous, soul-crushing neglect, had killed me. And the universe, in some strange, inexplicable act of pity or cosmic balancing, had given me what I'd wished for. I had another chance. A tremor ran through me, but it was not from fear. It was the birth of something new, something cold and hard and utterly unfamiliar. The hurt was still there, a deep, foundational ache, but it was now being overlaid with a layer of glacial resolve. I had spent 17 years of my first life trying to win their love, trying to earn a place in their family. I had been a ghost, a doormat, a convenience. I had died for their indifference. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't be begging for scraps from their table. This time, I would not be the victim in their story. They had shown me their endgame. They had revealed every card in their hand. And now, I had a year. 365 days to dismantle their world as thoroughly as they had dismantled mine. This wasn't just a second chance at life. It was a second chance at justice. The foundation of my family's cruelty was built on a simple, devastating premise. I was the practice child and Lila was the masterpiece. I was born when my parents were young, struggling to establish my father's architectural firm. I was a distraction, a responsibility that came before they were ready for the lavish lifestyle they craved. For years, it was just the three of us in a small, cramped apartment, and their resentment was a palpable fourth resident. Then, when I was 5, the firm took off. They bought the big house in the suburbs, the luxury cars, and decided they were ready for another child. A child they could do right this time. Lila was that child, their miracle baby, their do-over. And from the moment she was born, I was relegated to the shadows. My entire childhood became a highlight reel of their favoritism. I remembered my 7th birthday with painful clarity. I had begged for a bicycle, a shiny red one I'd seen in a store window. I spoke of nothing else for months. On my birthday morning, I was presented with a set of educational encyclopedias. "To help you with your studies, Anna," my father had said, patting me on the head. "You're the smart one, after all." Later that day, they surprised 2-year-old Lila with a top-of-the-line, custom-built tricycle, complete with a horn and streamers, even though she was too small to reach the pedals. "She just looks so cute in the catalog picture, we couldn't resist," my mother had chirped, taking dozens of photos of a bewildered Lila while I sat on the floor with my unread encyclopedia volume on aardvark. The pattern was set. My academic achievements were met with muted nods, while Lila's clumsy attempts at art were hailed as evidence of a budding prodigy. When I won the regional spelling bee in middle school, they forgot to attend the final round because Lila had a minor cold and needed to be monitored. I accepted my trophy to the polite applause of strangers and my English teacher, my eyes scanning the empty seats where my family should have been. When I got home, I found them coddling Lila on the sofa, feeding her soup and reading her stories. My trophy was placed on a bookshelf in my room, where it gathered dust, never once mentioned again. But the most insidious form of abuse was financial. My grandmother Alara, my mother's mother, had been a sharp, astute woman who saw her daughter and son-in-law for the status-obsessed, materialistic people they were. She adored me, seeing a kindred spirit in my quiet, observant nature. Before she passed away, she had set up a substantial trust fund in my name. It was ironclad, or so she thought. It was to be managed by my parents until my 18th birthday, at which point control would pass entirely to me. It was her gift, she had told me, of freedom. "So you'll always have a choice, Anna," she'd whispered, her hand frail in mine. "Never let anyone make you feel trapped." In my first life, I knew they dipped into it. They called it borrowing against your future. It started small, funding Lila's expensive summer camps, her private tennis lessons. But as I got older, their withdrawals became more brazen. The down payment for Lila's first car, a brand new convertible for her 16th birthday, came from my trust. My request for a used sedan to get to my part-time job was denied on the grounds of it being an unnecessary expense. My foreknowledge now filled in the horrifying gaps. I remembered hushed, late-night arguments from my previous life, words I hadn't understood then but which were now crystal clear. Words like liquidating assets, offshore transfer, and nervous conversations about their financial advisor, a man named Marcus Thorne, who specialized in creative accounting. They weren't just borrowing, they were systematically gutting my inheritance, planning to leave me with just enough to avoid legal trouble while funneling the bulk of it into their own accounts and a sham corporation set up under Lila's name for her future design empire. My death in that muddy pit would have been the final, convenient piece of their plan, allowing them to absorb what was left of the trust without any pesky questions from me. For the first week of my new life, I was a silent observer, confirming the timeline. I watched events replay exactly as I remembered them, a surreal and terrifying form of déjà vu. The same news reports on TV, the same arguments between my parents over trivial things, the same dismissive way they spoke to me. This wasn't a dream. This was real. The turning point, the moment the last vestiges of the old, passive Anna died for good, came on the evening of my 17th birthday. As expected, there was no cake, no presents, no acknowledgement from my parents. They were consumed with planning a weekend trip to a vineyard, a trip I wasn't invited on. I sat in my room, the silence a heavy blanket, and I made a vow. I would not be a victim. I would be a strategist. This house was no longer my home. It was a battlefield. And I would be its ghost, its silent spy, its final, unexpected victor. My plan began to form, a complex tapestry woven from my knowledge of the future and a newfound ice-cold determination. It had 3 primary phases: infiltration and evidence, alliance and fortification, and liberation and retribution. Phase 1 required me to become an even better ghost than before. I perfected the art of being overlooked. I kept my head down, my answers short, and my presence minimal. They loved it. Anna's in one of her quiet moods again. I heard my mother tell a friend on the phone. It's such a relief. Lila is so high energy, it's nice to have one child who doesn't demand anything. Demand anything, I thought with a bitter, silent laugh. You've trained me not to. This invisibility gave me the cover I needed. My father's office, the heart of their financial deception, became my primary target. I knew from my past life that his password for everything, from his email to his bank accounts, was a ridiculously sentimental and insecure combination. Lila Star 1. One Tuesday night, while they were at a lavish dinner celebrating the anniversary of their country club membership, I slipped into his sacred space. The room smelled of leather and self-importance. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I powered on his desktop computer and entered the password. Access granted. For the next 2 hours, I was a digital archaeologist, unearthing the bones of their crimes. It was all there, just as I remembered, but this time I knew what to look for. The folder labeled Household contained subfolders for every aspect of their financial lives, including one titled A's Future. It was a treasure trove of malfeasance. I found the emails to Marcus Thorne, their Weasley advisor, with subject lines like Re-A's fund restructuring and maximizing Lila's seed capital. I photographed every single one with my phone. I found bank statements showing massive transfers from the trust account to my father's business account, labeled as short-term loans that were never repaid. I found documents for an offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, with Lila listed as the sole beneficiary. The final, crucial step was planting the keylogger. It was a simple piece of software I'd researched and downloaded at the library, loaded onto a tiny, innocuous USB stick. I plugged it in, ran the installation, and in less than a minute, it was done. A silent, invisible spy that would now record every password, every email, every damning keystroke they made for the next year. I slipped out of the office, leaving no trace, my phone now a vault of evidence that would eventually become their undoing. Phase 2, alliance and fortification, was riskier. I needed a powerful ally, someone outside their sphere of influence. My thoughts immediately went to my great-uncle Arthur, my grandmother Alara's younger brother. My parents had painted him as a miserly recluse, a man who had been jealous of their happiness and had tried to interfere with my grandmother's will. The truth, I now suspected, was that he saw them for what they were, and they had cut him out to avoid his scrutiny. To fund this part of the plan, I needed my own money. I resurrected the part-time job I'd had in my past life, shelving books at the local library. I told my parents it was for extra school credit. They barely grunted in acknowledgement, too busy planning Lila's next shopping spree to care what I did with my afternoons. Every dollar I earned was saved, a secret hoard of independence. With it, I bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone. Finding Arthur's contact information was easier than I expected. He was the head of a major philanthropic foundation in the city, his name listed publicly on their website. Staring at his number on the cheap phone screen, a wave of fear washed over me. What if my parents were right? What if he hung up on me? It was a risk I had to take. With a trembling thumb, I wrote out the text message, a lifeline cast into the unknown. Uncle Arthur, this is Anna Sterling, Alara's granddaughter. I know this is sudden, but I am in serious trouble. My parents are stealing my trust fund. I have proof. My grandmother told me that if I ever needed true help, I should find you, please. I hit send, my heart pounding. The wait was agonizing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Just as I was about to despair, the phone buzzed. I've been waiting for this call for 10 years. Tell me where and when. I'll be there. We met at a small, discreet coffee shop miles from my neighborhood. Arthur was a tall, imposing man with sharp gray eyes that held the same intelligence and kindness I remembered in my grandmother. He listened intently as I laid out the entire story, from the decades of neglect to the impossible tale of my death and rebirth, to the financial documents I had copied from my father's computer. I showed him the photos on my phone. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the look on his face was one of profound sadness and cold, simmering fury. My sister knew, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. She saw their weakness, their greed. She tried to protect you with that trust. To think they would be so brazen, so cruel, it's monstrous. He looked at me, his gaze softening. You have her strength, Anna. She would be so proud of the fight you have in you. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. You are not alone in this anymore. From this moment on, their opponent isn't just an underestimated 17-year-old girl, it's me. And I have very, very deep pockets and a team of lawyers who eat men like your father for breakfast. We are going to let them walk deeper into their trap, and then we are going to burn their world to the ground. The final phase of my plan was my own. While Arthur's team began building the legal case in the shadows, I focused on my own escape. I would not just rely on the trust fund, I would build my own foundation. I studied with a singular, ferocious focus, my grades soaring. The university scholarship I'd missed in my past life was now my holy grail. I would earn my own way, build my own success. My victory would not just be about taking back what was mine. It would be about becoming someone they could never have imagined, someone completely independent of their tainted legacy. The next year would be a performance, a carefully orchestrated play where I was the meek daughter, the quiet sister, the invisible girl. They wouldn't see the gears turning, the traps being set, the guillotine being sharpened just for them. They had forgotten my birthday. They were about to learn that I was a debt they would never be able to repay. The year passed in a blur of calculated duality. At home, I was a study in beige, a human embodiment of non-confrontation. I did my chores without being asked. I ate my meals quickly and quietly, and I faded into the background of their vibrant, Lila-centric lives. My parents were thrilled. They had finally molded me into the perfect, low-maintenance accessory for their family portrait. They had no idea that beneath the placid surface, a revolution was brewing. My secret life was a whirlwind of activity. Twice a week, I would take the bus to a different part of the city for my clandestine meetings with Uncle Arthur and his legal team. We would sit in a sterile, soundproof conference room, high up in a skyscraper, a world away from my suffocating suburban existence. The team, led by a sharp, silver-haired woman named Miss Albright, was astounded by the evidence I'd gathered. The keylogger was a gold mine, capturing every password, every incriminating email, every desperate Google search my father made for how to hide assets from a beneficiary. They're not just sloppy, they're arrogant, Miss Albright remarked during one meeting, pointing to a particularly damning email exchange. They genuinely believe they are entitled to this money and that you're too timid and uninformed to ever challenge them. That arrogance will be their downfall. Arthur, meanwhile, took on the role of the mentor and father figure I never had. He wasn't just funding the legal battle, he was investing in me. He opened my eyes to the world of finance, teaching me about stocks, bonds, and portfolio management. He'd give me hypothetical scenarios asking how I would invest a certain sum, and we'd debate the merits of different strategies. Your grandmother wanted you to have freedom, Anna, he said one afternoon, but true freedom isn't just having money, it's having the knowledge to control it. They treated your inheritance like a lottery ticket. You will treat it like an empire. At school, I was relentless. I joined the debate club to sharpen my wits and the economics club to deepen my understanding of the world I was about to enter. I formed a study group with the brightest kids in my grade, and for the first time, I began to build real friendships, tentative connections, with people who saw me for my intellect and my quiet humor, not as Lila Sterling's drab older sister. The contrast between my two lives was jarring. I would spend an afternoon discussing corporate law with Miss Albright, then come home to find my mother and Lila in a panic because Lila's favorite shade of lipstick had been discontinued. I'd spend an evening at the library, poring over calculus equations, and return to find my father berating me for leaving a single dish in the sink while the kitchen counter was covered with the remains of Lila's elaborate smoothie-making experiment. Each slight, each moment of casual disregard was no longer a source of pain. It was fuel. It was a reminder of why I was doing this, a log on the fire of my resolve. As my 18th birthday approached, the déjà vu became more intense. Events began to unfold exactly as they had in my memory. Lila was accepted into the summer design program. My parents began planning her extravagant half-birthday party. I watched it all with the detached calm of a director watching a play for which she already knows the ending. The day of the party, my 18th birthday, arrived. The house was once again a chaotic symphony of caterers, florists, and my sister's shrieking friends. I stayed in my room, a silent observer looking down from my window. This time, when I saw my mother present Lila with a velvet box, when I saw my grandmother's sapphire necklace clasped around my sister's throat, I felt a strange sense of peace. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. The final proof of their utter betrayal had been publicly displayed for all to see. In my first life, this moment had destroyed me. In this one, it liberated me. It was the starting gun for the rest of my life. That night, I waited until the last of the music had faded, until the sound of my parents' exhausted but triumphant chatter had given way to snores. The house was dark and still, littered with the casualties of their celebration. I moved through it like a wraith, my pre-packed bags in hand. I took one last look at the living room, at the banner that read, "Congratulations, Lila," hanging crookedly over the fireplace. I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no sadness. It was like looking at a stranger's house. On the gleaming dining room table, where they would be sure to see it in the morning, I placed a single, crisp white envelope. Inside, the note was short, every word a carefully sharpened dart. "You finally got what you always wanted. I'm gone." I walked out the front door and didn't look back. George, my uncle's driver, was waiting for me in the same discreet black car at the end of the street. He opened the door for me, his expression calm and reassuring. "Everything is in place, Miss Anna," he said softly. "Welcome to your first day." As the car pulled away, I glanced at the house in the rearview mirror. It looked small and dark, a monument to a life that was no longer mine. A life I had not just escaped, but defeated. The real work was about to begin. The year that followed was a revelation. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be a priority, to be nurtured and supported. Uncle Arthur's home was not just a mansion, it was a sanctuary. He gave me a beautiful suite of rooms overlooking his expansive gardens, and he gave me the space and quiet I needed to heal, while simultaneously pushing me to grow. The morning after my escape, the legal machinations began. As per my instructions, Miss Albright filed the motion to transfer control of the trust, citing my legal adulthood. As we predicted, my parents' lawyer responded with a request for a delay, attaching a condescending letter from my parents that described me as a troubled and impressionable young woman who had fallen under the undue influence of a greedy and estranged relative. They demanded a competency hearing. "This is perfect," Miss Albright said, a grim smile on her face during our video call. "They're creating a paper trail of their own arrogance. They think this is a family squabble. They have no idea they're walking into a fraud prosecution." Her team responded not by arguing about my competency, but by presenting the court with a preliminary sample of the evidence I had collected. A few of the most damning emails between my father and Marcus Thorne. It was a calculated shot across the bow. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, immediately granted my petition and went a step further, ordering a temporary freeze on the trust's assets and appointing a neutral third-party auditor to conduct a full review. The fallout was immediate. The first voicemail from my father was apoplectic. "Anna, what in God's name do you think you're doing? You call off these lawyers right now. You have no idea the damage you're causing. Your mother is beside herself." I listened to it with Arthur in his study, my expression unreadable. "He's not angry that he got caught," Arthur observed quietly. "He's angry that you're not playing your part. The damage he's worried about is to his reputation, not to your mother's feelings." I started university that fall on a full academic scholarship I had earned myself. I chose to major in economics, a field I now found fascinating. I made friends, joined study groups, and experienced the simple joys of a normal young adult life that had been denied to me. I went to football games, stayed up late debating philosophy in the dorm common rooms, and discovered a love for spicy Thai food. I was building a new identity, one that had nothing to do with the Sterling family. Anna, the forgotten daughter, was fading away, replaced by Anna, the sharp, driven, and surprisingly happy university student. The voicemails from my family kept coming, each one a window into their slow motion collapse. After the accounts were frozen, they could no longer siphon money from my trust to prop up my father's struggling business or fund their lavish lifestyle. The calls became more desperate, shifting from anger to strained attempts at manipulation. "Anna, darling, it's Mom," one message began, her voice syrupy sweet. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Why don't you come home for dinner and we can sort this all out, just the three of us?" Just the three of us, I noted. Lila wasn't even mentioned. They were trying to cut her out to save themselves. Lila left messages too, each one a masterpiece of self-absorbed whining. "This is ridiculous, Anna. My car got repossessed. And Dad says I might have to get a job. A job. This is all your fault. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me." I never answered. I never responded. My silence was a wall they could not breach, and it drove them insane. Meanwhile, the auditor's report came back, and it was a bombshell. It confirmed our worst suspicions and uncovered even more. My parents had embezzled over 70% of the trust's original value. They had forged my signature on documents. They had committed tax fraud. Marcus Thorne, their advisor, had been running similar schemes for other wealthy clients. The case was no longer just a civil matter. It was criminal. Miss Albright confidentially passed the information to the district attorney's office. As the months ticked by, leading up to my 19th birthday, I watched from a distance as their world crumbled. My father's business, starved of my cash infusions, folded. They were forced to take out a second mortgage on the house. Their friends, sensing the stench of financial ruin, began to distance themselves. The date of my 19th birthday arrived, the 1-year anniversary of my rebirth. There was no storm outside this time. The evening was clear and cool. My apartment, which I had purchased with a loan co-signed by Arthur, was filled with the warm chatter of my new friends. Arthur stood beside me, his presence a comforting anchor. He handed me a small, elegant box. Inside was not a sapphire, but a starburst of diamonds on a simple platinum chain. "Your grandmother left this for you, too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The instructions were to give it to you on the day you truly became your own woman. I believe that day is today." Tears of gratitude welled in my eyes as he fastened it around my neck. It was a symbol not of a stolen past, but of a reclaimed future. As my friends began to sing happy birthday, my phone, resting on the counter, buzzed. It was a text from Miss Albright. "The dominoes are falling. Happy birthday, Anna." At that exact moment, a professional process server was knocking on the door of my old house. He served my stunned parents and a bewildered Lila with a massive civil lawsuit detailing every cent of their fraud and seeking punitive damages that would financially obliterate them. Within the hour, their phones began to ring. It wasn't birthday wishes. The bank called to inform them that, due to the lawsuit, every one of their accounts was now frozen solid. Their credit card company called to tell them their cards were declined. An agent from the bank's foreclosure department left a message informing them that, due to their defaulted second mortgage, proceedings to seize their house would begin immediately. Simultaneously, based on the information from our auditor, detectives from the DA's white-collar crime unit were executing a search warrant on Marcus Thorne's offices. His arrest would be the lead story on the local news that night. The panic I had envisioned was more chaotic than I could have imagined. I knew because Arthur's head of security, a discreet man named Miller, had arranged for surveillance outside the house. He sent me a short, encrypted report. They were screaming at each other, the sound audible from the street. My father was blaming my mother for her extravagant spending. My mother was blaming him for his foolish risks. Lila was screaming at both of them, a wild, cornered animal who was just beginning to understand that her life of effortless privilege was over. Their final, pathetic act was to drive to Arthur's estate, their last, desperate hope. They hammered on the iron gates, screaming my name. Miller's security team met them, calm and implacable. They were informed they were trespassing and that police would be called if they didn't leave. Miller sent me one last thing: a high-resolution photo from the gate's security camera. It captured the three of them in the harsh glare of the headlights. My father, slumped against the car, his face buried in his hands. My mother, her makeup streaked with tears, her mouth open in a silent scream. and Lila, her beautiful face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and disbelief. They were shipwrecked, and they had finally realized that I was not their lifeboat. I was the storm. I looked at the photo, then looked around at the smiling faces of my friends, at my uncle's proud expression, at the beautiful, warm life I had built for myself. They had tried to erase me, but they had only made me invincible. The panic was theirs now. The peace was all mine.